የእስራኤልና የኢትዮጵያ ታሪክ ብዙ ሺህ ዘመን ያሳለፈ የቆየ ነው።
The 2 days forum is to strengthen the ties between Ethiopia and Israel. The relationship between the two countries stands a long years back. The ties based on historical, tourism, trade and culture. Israel and Ethiopia is demarcated with a Red Sea. Thus, this forum is aimed at building a strong relationship between two countries on religion, tourism, business and other sectors. In addition, people-to-people ties are another target. Israel has able to build the state within 7 years with high qualified human power, advanced in sciences that Ethiopia must learn from.
The main goal of this conference was to expose the touristic and the business opportunities in Israel, also for travel agents, but also for pilgrimage and businessmen. And I think we try to connect the past, which is very important and rich, but also the modern Israel and the future. And I think for businessmen and visitors in Israel, also for people that come for pilgrimage, it can be a very fascinating visit to Israel, seeing the past, which we share common history and common narratives, but also the modern Israel and the future, and how this connects into a very small country. I think this is a fascinating thing to see. His Excellency Ambassador of Israel, Leonid Masur, distinguished guests, thank you very much everyone for coming today and allowing us the opportunity to expose or to elaborate on the opportunities that both of our countries have in tourism and also business, which I will touch shortly. As Kes Daniel mentioned in his fascinating lecture, the ties between Israel and Ethiopia are historical and are long-standing, and we share a lot of common in terms of history and legacy. I would like to take us a bit forward and to elaborate more on other issue that Israel is very good at, or a leading country in the world, which is innovation. Well, we talked about the opportunities for tourism in Israel in terms of historical sites and religion, but I think another important thing to know is that Israel is a home to one of the most vibrant innovation scene in the world. I would like to elaborate a bit on that in the coming 30 minutes. But before we start, we'll do a short methodic break. I will show you a bit of modern Israel, modern touristic sites in Israel. I'm sure you're all familiar with the sites in Jerusalem, Nazareth, and more. But in this short video, you can get a glimpse of some other touristic sites in Israel that might be very interesting. For pilgrimage, but also for businessmen, and other kinds of tourism that can come to Israel. So let's watch the video and then we start the lecture.
For us, who are studying in the historical and in the cultural aspect, it's like to speak about Israel and Ethiopia is like to speak about the same nation with two governance. Once if you just looking into the depths of the history, the faith, especially the religious history, the culture, the language, the family of languages, and the family relationship between the two nations, you simply felt that you are speaking about simply of one nation, but in two geographical places with two governances. So this is very easy to feel it, because we share the same root of historical narratives, and we have a linguistic, a same family of linguistic group, and we have also very deep relationship in religion, that we share the same scripture in the Orit, or in the Old Testament, or in the Hebrew Bible, and most especially when you come to Ethiopia, you have also a kind of deep roots in the political and state history of Ethiopia. When you speak about the power legitimacy theory of the old Ethiopian royal or kingship system, you find this Solomonic dynasty, which is basically rooted in the relationship between the Ethiopian queen, or the Queen of Sheba, Makeda, and with the King of Solomon. And then even before that, you have one of the most respected prophet in the history of Israel, Moses. He has a family relationship with the Ethiopian rulers of his time. So all these scriptural narratives, these historical narrations, easily gives you some kind of deeply rooted family ties existed in these two nations. So founded with this, and simply with a perspective of this, you can see, or you can figure it out, that you have plenty of relationship in history. Like the ambassador was saying, that after the destruction of the second temple, most of the tribes of Israel were migrated from Israel, and they were dispersed in many parts of the world, and they were in Saudi Arabia, they were in Africa, they were in Asia, and they were also in part of Europe. So with this also you have this migrations which happened some 500-600 years before the birth of Christ. So through history, through the span of history, you have this social, demographic, and historical ties, very much related. Family were established, and beyond that, you can see, the literary history, the artistic history, also much more related to the life and tradition of the Jewish people. And so, this simply tells you that we have the same root, we have the same background. So, this is the perspective that we see, the relationship between the two nations. And this never been interrupted. Ethiopian used to travel on foot to Israel without interruption for the last 3,000 years. And in the same way, the people of Israel, they were also traveling to Ethiopia. And you have all these historical records that testify, that gives a testimony for this kind of relationship. And we have already established, beyond the culture, beyond the history, a kind of family, blood relationship. So this is a perspective that we see, the relationship between the two nations. And especially in the modern history, from the mid of 19th century, if you can start from the time of Emperor Theodorus, you have a very tightly related, consequently, one after another, without interruption. Ethiopian royals were very much interested. They established centers in Israel, like starting from Emperor Theodorus, you have Emperor Johannes, Emperor Menelik, Queen Zawditu, and Emperor Haile Selassie. We have a number of presence and already in buildings and churches, monasteries, which are built by the royal families especially from this time onwards. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist before, but this is very unique, and you can reflect even from this perspective.
The tourists and enjoy also history, but also to see the cutting-edge technology you can see anywhere in the world, while enjoying other activities such as going to the beach, going to good restaurants. So I'll talk a little bit about what Israel can offer in terms of innovation and technology. But first of all, we need to talk about innovation because it's a very big word. So there are many definitions about innovation, what it means. But I think the simplest is just the ability to find solutions to problems. It doesn't have to be invention. It doesn't mean that you have to invent something new, but you can also use something that is also already there. But if you find a way to adjust it in order to solve other problems, this is innovation. And Israel is one of the leading countries in the world for innovation. And innovation is important. And why? There are many reasons. But if you look at this chart, you see a list of the biggest companies in the world in 2006. You can see that most of them are in finance or in energy. But 10 years later, 2016, not mentioning today, but 2016, almost all the biggest companies in the world are in the field of innovation. And you can see that almost next to any name, there is the Israeli flag. It means that this company has a center in Israel. And this is something that really unique, and I will elaborate a bit more. Why is it happening? And I will reveal our secret soon, and how is it related to business and tourism as well. So a little bit about Israel, modern Israel. Population is about 9 million. And look at this figure. The population is very young. Most of the population is between 20 and 65. And I think this is a bit similar to what we have in Ethiopia. Maybe Ethiopia is a bit younger, but Israel is also a very young country in terms of the age of the citizens, but also in terms of existence. We were established in 1948. Our workforce is 3 million people, and if you can see, most of them are occupied in innovation-related businesses. This is why I think this is why we call the startup nation. Almost every Israeli you meet is related to innovation in somehow, whether it's a business or civil servant. And we have 290,000 people that are working in the high-tech sector, which is quite unique. In Israel, you can find one startup for every 1,600 people. This is the highest ratio in the world in terms of people that are working in startups. If you look at charts, I can now share with you a few charts. There are many indexes that check who is the most innovative country, where is the best environment for innovation, where is the most developed ecosystem for innovation. So we can go through a few charts, but it's a bit boring, but we have to. If you look at Israel, for example, is ranked first in North Africa and West Africa region, the leading country in innovation. If you look at another chart that we have, this one I think is from the OECD. So Israel is in third place after Switzerland and the USA, which are much more, let's say, older countries and wealthier countries. So this is quite impressive that Israel is only 74 years old, with all the history that you all know, wars, immigration, and so on, and still third place in the world. Israel also leads in R&D investment. It means that if you have a company, you better come to Israel, because then you can open your research and development center, you can easily find investors, and you can find great minds that are the fruit of the Israeli education system.
These days, we have many Israelis who are living in Jerusalem, in Israel, who have a family relationship with Ethiopia. They are now Israeli citizens and who are assuming several political and social positions in Israel. And more than everything, we can develop this kind of family relationship first, so that this kind of social bondage will further develop into economic, technological, tourism, especially because we have already existing, a long-standing relationship in traveling. Ethiopian to Israel and Israelis to Ethiopia, so we can build amazing tourism relationship with it, because we have a number of histories there physically existed, and they have also a number of histories here which are physically existed. So this by the way, one of it also opens a new era, because not only Ethiopian from Ethiopia traveling to Jerusalem these days, there are Ethiopian from all over the world traveling to Jerusalem, from America, from Europe, and from Australia, and also from the rest of Africa outside of Ethiopia. So we can promote this a lot, and we can make it an organized system of tourism, and we can also make development of centers with our centers in Jerusalem, and also Israeli centers in Ethiopia. And the other thing, we can also establish all sort of relationship, like political, economic, and geopolitical relationship also. I believe that will be very fruitful.
So I try to show in my presentation, after the very interesting lectures we had by Case Daniel on the touristic sites in Israel, on the historical sites, I try to show also the modern Israel, the innovation country that we are now, and I try to touch the reasons or the main elements that helped us to get to this point. And now can this be related also for tourism and business opportunities? I think if someone comes to Israel and not knowing or not aware about these opportunities or about these sites that you can see in Israel, you can miss a lot of what we have to offer. So it's very good, and we are really encouraging people to come to Israel for pilgrimage, but I think it would also be very interesting to add to that some sightseeing or just walking in the streets of modern Israel and get the impression of how Israel is now in these modern days. R&D centers are operating in Israel. If you can spot the logos, you can see that if you look at yourself, some device that you have on you was developed in Israel, because the R&D centers are in Israel. If we can mention a few, Sony, Toshiba, Samsung, Facebook, Google, Nokia, and more. So it's not for nothing that these companies choose to establish their R&D centers in Israel. There are a few reasons for that, but I think the main reason is that Israel is a country with open minds and young population that is willing to succeed. And I think this is a great reason for that, and we can elaborate it more, but I don't want to take a lot of time for that. Another big reason for R&D centers is that the venture capital availability in Israel is the highest in the world in comparison to population. So it means that if you have a startup and you do it in Israel, most probably you will have no problem to get an investor to come and invest in your startup. Because investors in the world believe in the Israeli high-tech ecosystem, innovation ecosystem, and it was proved many times. I'm sure you've heard of big companies that made a very successful startup. We can mention Waze and Mobileye and other more, which I'm sure you know. And some of them you are not even aware that you are using Israeli technologies or technologies that were developed in Israel. For example, the flash disks. They are an Israeli development, so everybody uses that. This is just a short example. But we can continue with charts and indexes. It's not the point. I think the point is clear. We all know that Israel is leading in innovation, and what kind of innovation? So it's very diverse. This is another successful thing about Israel, because we have countries that are very good in innovation, but they are expert in some areas of innovation. In Israel, you can mention water and energy, mobile, telecom, big data, agri-tech, fintech, digital health, software, artificial intelligence, cyber. But the great thing in Israel is that all these sectors are combined. The Israeli companies manage to mix all of these sectors together. So you can find companies in Israel, for example, that they do precision agriculture, which means you can send a drone to the air. This drone, using big data, can scan a big field, and by doing that, can tell the farmer how much he needs to irrigate, and save money, and also be more precise. So the thing in Israel, the unique thing in Israel, is the ability to combine all these sectors together. And this is also, there are many reasons for that, but I think one reason for that is Israel is very tiny, as you may know. So it's really easy, also physically, to cooperate with other companies to get more ideas. So this is the innovation ecosystem in a glimpse, because we are not now in innovation conference, just to give you an idea. So I will stop here. But many people ask me when I'm talking about Israel innovation, how Israel is so successful in innovation, what we've done, what was our story of success, what is our secret? So the answer is quite complicated, because there is no textbook for that. There is no solution that you can do, or you can follow steps, and you can succeed. Every country with its own conditions, with its own circumstances, with its own abilities. So I'm going to talk about Israel. It doesn't mean that this is the right solution, or this is the path to success. But this was our case. So if we can make it short, I think there are few elements that made Israel the startup nation. So we are constantly working in order to strengthen the relations. There are lots to be done, although the relations are very strong, and we have amazing cooperation with the Ethiopian government and the Ethiopian people. It's always good to explore new opportunities, new ways, and we are keep doing that. This conference is an example for that. We are constantly trying to expand the relations, also the economic relations, which are fine, that we can do much more. And I think this event is a good kickoff to a continuous cooperation in tourism and business cooperation.